Welcome. Thank you for joining our ECM Best Practice Series webinar. I'm Becky Melody, your hostess for today's presentation. Our featured speaker, Ken Hayward from QMOS, will be presenting. The discussion today will cover introductions, USDM at a glance, QMOS at a glance, our webinar logistics, and our discussion topic, key reasons to consolidate your compliance activities on a single platform. The content of our presentation will be covered in approximately 30 minutes, and then we will welcome questions from everyone joining us. We'll invite you to post those questions to our team via the iLink message board on the lower left of your screen, and we further invite you to join the discussion on our USDM LinkedIn page, or if you have a question that's of a confidential nature, feel free to send it directly to my email, which will be on screen at the end of the presentation. Today's agenda will include the need for a compliance platform approach, benefits of a platform approach, some real-world scenarios, a little about the QMOS and USDM partnership, conclusions, and then, of course, our question and answers. USDM is focused exclusively on the life science domain. We're the market leader in providing IT, quality, and regulatory compliance professional service solutions. We're headquartered in Ventura, California, and we've delivered successful projects with over 130 life science clients, and we're a preferred compliance partner for small, mid-tier, and large life science companies. We specialize in assisting clients with reducing regulatory risk while maximizing their investment in ECM, QMS, manufacturing suites, and laboratory instrument systems, as well as IT infrastructure. Our directive is to simplify, unify, and optimize compliance and business objectives. We are very pleased to partner with QMOS and to have Chief Technical Officer from QMOS, Ken Hayward, with us today. Ken has had over 20 years' experience in the regulated software and document management industries. With extensive knowledge of compliance-related technologies and the business problems they solve, Ken has designed software systems for regulated companies since the early 1980s. Originally a client before joining QMOS in 2002, Ken worked with the London International Group, Kinesis Systems, and Price Waterhouse Coopers. Thank you again for being with us today, and now I'll turn the presentation over to Ken.
Thank you, Becky. I appreciate that, and thank you to USDM for hosting this webinar. I'm going to speak to you today about the concept of a compliance platform, what we mean by that, and what we believe the business pressures are that demand such a solution. Before I go into that, I've got just 2 slides on QMOS as a company, so I won't bore you with too much of our detail. But I think it is important to say that we have been in business for 17-ish years, mid-90s when we started, and we have customers that have been with us since the late 90s, and many of them for more than a decade. So a lot of experience of not only designing systems like this, but also living with that design over a long period of time. 95% of our customer base is in pharmaceutical, biotech, and medical device industries, and we have a few customers in other sectors. I should just point out my bio there, 20 years of history and working since the early 80s. I think I must be about 70 years old by now. Either that or I started very young. Marketing have put together for me a slide of representative QMOS customers. I think what's important to me from this list is 2 things, really. Firstly, the spread of customers across different aspects of life sciences, and also the spread between very large global multinationals such as GlaxoSmithKline and Boehringer Ingelheim, Johnson & Johnson, right down to West Coast biotechs of 20 and 30 people. And for QMOS as a software product company, all of those companies on that list are running exactly the same software. We don't do variants and varieties for different markets. We have one software platform that's used by our entire customer base. Okay, so on to the meat of it. Over the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen compliance trends converging, in our opinion, to a common standard. And I'm going to highlight in the next slide some of those standards that we think are emerging. And compliance these days affects all aspects of business, and your supply chain, and your marketing partners, and your manufacturing partners if you have a manufacturing operation. And so compliance is wide and deep. By wide, I mean it affects everyone in the business, and deep in that the tentacles of compliance reach down into all the systems you're operating, whether it may be your detailing process during sales and marketing calls, whether it's the supplier audits that your team are performing, or whether it's the manufacturing or development of drug products. So compliance covers the whole organization at a great depth. And lastly, I think we're seeing very, very clever and innovative penalties being applied in a very prescriptive and long-term way. So thinking about things like integrity agreements, corporate integrity agreements, where companies are signing up to be penalized, and therefore it's more of a contractual process rather than a legal process. And that's causing many heartaches and loss of profit to the industry. So to summarize that, regulations are becoming similar, wide and deep across the business, and affect both internal and external staff. I thought I'd just highlight one example of that, and it's our old friend, policies and procedures, probably the most boring of all the compliance topics. But I think it's important because it's the very heart and core of what we mean by compliance. And policies and procedures are how we say how we're going to operate our business and how we document the ways that operation is going to take place. And of course, for many years, we've had adequate procedure requirements within their predicate rules, within CFR 20, GMP, GCPs, etc. But now we're seeing that same approach being adopted across the industry. And the most recent example was the UK Bribery Act, which is roughly the same as the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in the US, which again, there's only one defense to that act, and that is that you have in place adequate procedures designed to prevent certain behavior patterns. Equivalently, guidelines for hospitals requiring the development and distribution of written policies and procedures. So adequate procedures, adequate policies at the absolute heart of a compliance program, whether you're talking about human resources, supply chain, clinical or manufacturing. So I'm going to introduce the idea of a platform here, and we'll come back to this again in a minute. But this is something that we've been discussing in forum like this for maybe 5 or 6 years, and that's the concept of closed-loop compliance, and then applying that concept to a number of different business areas. And we see that there are a common set of requirements where tracking and interpreting regulations, so businesses that are required, for example, to comply with the aggregate spend tracking laws that have recently been introduced in the Sunshine Act and in state acts. They've introduced a requirement for new policies and procedures, new ways of behaving, and the need to communicate, train, and educate staff on how those procedures are operated. So if you take any subject matter and pass it round that loop, you have the same kind of requirements. Now, in the case of aggregate spend, for example, the exceptions and deviations are where set budgets are exceeded or state or federal limits are exceeded. And audit and investigation, in manufacturing, you may be doing supplier audits and GMP audits of plants. Within an aggregate spend environment, you're auditing your financials to ensure that all of that financial information has been captured. Managing exceptions and deviations wherever they've occurred within those processes. And then the critical aspect, and the one that's usually missed, is a programmatic way of assessing and implementing that change so that business practice changes, not just procedure. And then those go back into the loop and inform subsequent cycles. And I think also very important is the central piece of making risk-based decisions on how that compliance is operated. And I was interested in reading the USDM service guide that they very much specialize in a risk-based approach to validation. And I think risk-based approaches are now core to what we do across compliance, whether in a project or within a long-term production environment. So that's what we mean by a platform from a business perspective, is a means to operate all of the boxes in that loop in a consistent, coordinated way. I've just broken down the core capabilities in the center in blue, and then looking at how they align to common requirements and regulated industries. And I'm not going to spend too long on this, but just to say that a core technology around content and process management with configured packages, integration to line of business applications, and also pieces like learning management technologies, content distribution, etc., are required to deliver those core capabilities. Okay, so then if we turn that back around again and say, take the technology platform that QMAS has, how is that then realized to customers so that they can deliver real business benefit upon it? And the blue boxes here are examples of existing packages that are deployed and in production with our customer base. And so if you look at the traditional areas of quality management and R&D, within a quality management environment, you're looking at policy and procedure control, corrective and preventative actions, deviation management, and then change control to effect change upon that business. Learning management goes across the organization. How do you implement change and educate that through learning management? If you then move to the R&D side, we have a full R&D solution from discovery to regulatory that allows a very open and collaborative environment within a clinical study. And then moving towards a much tighter controlled regulatory environment with the automatic generation of things like ECTDs, MAs, BLAs, etc., and integration with all the key players within that R&D ECTD publishing space. So whichever platform you wish to use, whether insourced or outsourced for production of submissions, we have the integration with the technology to do that, and that same platform can then be used through tech transfer to move those compounds or those medical devices into a production environment. And in that case, you may be insourcing your R&D but outsourcing your manufacturing, and so you also need a way to collaborate outside the firewall and bring those companies inside your system. So all of that requires consistent and coherent platform to be able to deliver on it. Okay, I should just point out that if you have any questions as we go along, you can key those into the chat box, which is on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. Okay, so that's a little bit about the platform. I now want to be slightly challenging and look at the business environment. And so this is a QMAS-centric look at what a pharma or med device or biotech company looks like from a process perspective. And the idea of this is not to look at or think about every single arrow on the diagram, but to look at the way all of the processes and the capabilities are interconnected. And the four blue boxes in the center we consider to be critical to any compliance platform that you're delivering. And then the white boxes are looking at what processes interact with those. And if you take an example such as clinical study management, clearly that needs document control. It also needs access to the same document store that your manufacturing processes are using, because where you're making clinical batch sizes, they need to use the same or similar procedures for manufacture. Equivalently, in risk and audit management, which is an area we often don't think about in terms of traditional GMP compliance, they're raising observations and actions that have a specific compliance impact on the business. And so using the same deviation issue management tools within the risk and audit departments as you are using within manufacturing and R&D allows you to have something that we consider critical, which is a single place to look at all your outstanding compliance actions. And if you don't have a single place to go to look at all of those, there's no way you can adequately apply a risk-based approach to addressing them. Because without that one place to see the actions and the outstanding commitments, you're unable to balance the priorities across the whole compliance landscape. And one last point on there, one of the most irritating things I think about in terms of all the products I interact with is everything has its own task management dialogue. And so you have to log into 20 different systems to action your daily workload. Within this compliance environment, we have one single task management framework that allows you to see all the things you're expected to be doing wherever they've arisen from within the business and action them directly within that dialogue. Also echoed to your email so that you know they're there in the first place. So that's how we see the business environment, highly connected, highly dependent, and where a common set of capabilities are then exposed across the business through a variety of different tools. We talked there about the basics, if you like, which is delivering clinical studies, transferring technology to a production environment, and then good manufacturing practice and good distribution practice around getting those products out to market. What we're now doing is working with clients who've already implemented that platform, achieved those early goals, and are now looking for ways to further automate their business processes and gain additional benefit from the platform. And I'm using this one as an example of where you buy the platform for one good business reason, and you can find additional ways to leverage it in the future. So this particular solution is around manufacturing documentation. And whether you're in medical device, pharma, or biotech, sooner or later there are products to be made. And our research suggests that almost 5 times the time is required to complete the documentation as is required to do bulk manufacture. Now that means you have product waiting for QA release for much longer than the physical processes are requiring. Our research also suggests that the traditional ERP-style companies are not addressing the documentation aspects of life sciences in a way that's most optimal. And so looking at this example, we see a maturity curve from initial control, policies and procedures, CAPAs, etc., that I mentioned earlier, achieving basic compliance, and then looking at the performance of the system to see how that can be improved. And if I take this particular scenario, and so where you're making products, whether that be drug or device product, you have a similar kind of process that you go through as highlighted on this diagram. There is some form of master batch record, or maybe in the case of a device, it's a list of documentation and process steps, which is pre-approved. And that template is often for a particular product and batch size, maybe a particular formulation and packaging, etc. And what companies have traditionally done is either try and shoe that format into their ERP system through the bill of materials, or develop it on paper. And as soon as you embed data within documentation, you lose control of the individual pieces. And so we're delivering a system right now for a customer that is automating the process of generating batch records based on approved templates, where all of this is held as data within the process management system, and is then tracking that documentation through subsequent production stages, allowing reuse of common pieces such as equipment selection, room selection, gathering of environmental metrics, etc., and then speeding the approval process so that we can get to QA release much quicker. And I think this is an interesting scenario because you can't even begin to look at this until you've already implemented the core pieces of the platform, such as document management, deviations, CAPAs, change control, dashboards, etc. And so this is the benefit you get from using that platform and then extending its capability. Now, the headline benefits that we're seeing from that are firstly a substantial cost and time advantage. And by substantial, we're looking in one instance to reduce QA release time from 12 days, 2 days, and reducing by 80% the overall time window of batch release. Now, that's a huge benefit that it's very difficult to achieve in any other way. But we're also seeing a lot of side benefits in there: removal of paper from the process, improved accuracy, and Possibly in the future, the most important is the exposure of what was previously locked in production details. And we see this kind of solution to being on the way to an automated annual product report, and moving the product reporting from being a point in time to being a continuously available report. And that seems to us to be doing the same thing for the documentation and reporting side of the business as previously ERP did to the physical manufacture. Now that example is in manufacturing. We have similar automation examples within instantiating one-off batches within medical devices, or automating the production of clinical trial structures and pre-trial information. And wherever you look within the business, there are opportunities to leverage that platform. Okay, so I'm trying to be a little challenging there and put some ideas out on what a platform can do for you. I think it's important when you're doing such things to consider how you implement it. And we enjoy working with USDM, a very similar company to us with a long history in regulated industry. And I think two of the things that USDM are particularly doing that are important are the risk-based validation methodology and the validation accelerator packs. One of the biggest criticisms we've had in prior years is how long it takes to implement a system of that complexity. And we have also implemented validation packages on top that I mentioned earlier that allow our customers to deploy solutions very quickly. And USDM are taking the same approach. And I think it's fair to say that they're probably well ahead of the rest of the industry in the validation accelerator packs. Secondly, risk-based validation methodology. It takes a lot of courage to do that as a vendor, and I think USDM deserve great credit for it. Okay, so let's take the assumption that you've deployed a platform, and you've probably deployed it to address a specific business need, such as clinical studies, ECTD submissions, SOP management in manufacturing. That's often how it starts. But what we're seeing 2 or 3 years down the line with our customers is that this kind of benefit being obtained from using a platform approach. I mentioned already an example of automating compliance functions. I think the APR or the PQR is a perfect example of applying business intelligence and data warehousing to the compliance data set, where you can actually extract data that's business meaningful, not just compliance meaningful. And another area, looking at the number of arrows on my original chart, is having a consistent mechanism for integrating with line of business applications, where you have ERP and chromatography and LIMS and maybe a dispensing system in manufacturing. You don't want to be creating too many custom interfaces between them. Having a single compliance platform allows you to at least consolidate that part of the portfolio. Okay, so in conclusion, compliance activities, we talked about width and depth, requiring the use of consistent tool sets. Without that, you can very quickly end up with separate islands of data within your clinical department, for example, compared to your outsourced manufacturing. When you start to increase the size of the business, they become very painful. And many of our projects over the last few years have been consolidating repositories down to a single global repository. And I should mention at that stage, our largest client has about 125,000 users running off a single system, and somewhere in the order of 5 million documents. And so when you look at scaling, you can look at scaling to very large sizes at good performance. But most importantly, that data is available across the business in whatever application that people are using. I think, secondly, compliance used to be about checklists and ticking boxes. We believe now it's about cost and profit. The company who achieves their compliance the most efficiently and leverages that to improve the activities of the business can directly contribute to the costs and the profit of the company as a whole. And I think the last two I want to pick up is there are automation opportunities such as the EMBR I mentioned earlier that you really only see when you take that platform approach. And until you have that in place, it's impossible to envisage those things as possible. And lastly, when you do come to deliver a system like this, choose companies with a successful track record. There's nothing quite like having the same customer for 15 years to keep you very honest as a vendor. And lastly, industrial strength. These things have to work for very many years, and once they're in place, they're very hard to take out. So getting it right first time is extremely important. Okay, at that point, we're just about at the half-hour point. Becky, are there any questions registered during that?
Thank you, Ken. Yes, we do have a few questions coming in, and thank you all for your participation there. The first question is from Steve, asking, is it possible to extend the access to this platform to our external partners? Continues, we have third parties who are required to update documents, respond to issues, receive SOPs, etc.
Absolutely, great question. And I think one of the big trends in the industry is the use of outsourcing and partnerships. And so we have quite a few customers who have systems both inside and outside the firewall, and are using those to collaborate with vendors and partners and marketing partners. So yes, very much an ongoing trend.
Very good. Our next question is from Mary. We see compliance needs across various functional areas in our organization. Any suggestions on how and where do we begin?
Great question. We always say that begin with someone who has a need for a system right now, and we would very much say address their specific needs with a solution, but make sure you keep in mind the future possibilities and install the platform in such a way that it's not owned by that one business unit.
Very good, very good. Let's see, the next question is from Sandeep. Can this compliance platform be integrated with existing in-house systems?
Again, good question. Yes, it can. Obviously, we'd need to talk in detail about which systems you mean. We have lots of customers who have existing systems, or indeed parts of the platform they want to use another vendor for, where they already have that in place. So learning management, for example, we've integrated with most of the major learning management players. And I should say on the document management side that it will run happily on Oracle or SQL Server or Documentum if you desire.
Very good, very good. Let's see. Next one from Susan. Can a platform manage multiple regulatory changes from various agencies?
Okay, sorry, could you repeat that, Becky? I just missed the last piece of that.
I'm happy to. Can a platform manage multiple regulatory changes from various agencies?
Absolutely. And it's worth saying we also have integrations with external data feeds. If you are interested in receiving regulatory updates and being able to match those to internal content, we have a very neat solution around that.
Tremendous. Let's see, and it looks like our last question on the chat room there, excuse me, is from Sarah. It says, what kinds of benefits have your customers received from consolidating compliance activities with a single vendor solution?
Well, that's a big question, and I tried to address that with the benefits slide earlier, but I think every customer is different. Certainly the common answers are a reduction in cost of operation and cost of ownership, the reduction in the size of the application portfolio, which many CIOs want to do these days, and additionally, easier integration between pieces of the solution.
Tremendous. An additional question in from Brian. Let's see, can you further define the platform that is the platform a document repository and compliance methodology combination, and or is it an actual system application? And what are the automated tools?
Great question. So the system itself is a web-based application that can be deployed either inside the enterprise or on a hosted system. and is accessed through your normal browser on the desktop, and can even be done in a zero footprint deployment. I'm not sure if that answered it, but close enough, hopefully.
Part 2 is the automated tools, Ken?
Yes, apologies. So from the automated tools, we have automated tools for, there's probably something like a dozen or 20 tools around the product, from things like bulk loading of data from existing systems. So we have automated import from, for example, Documentum or the file system, to automated tools around scanning, indexing large volumes of documents, and also for configuration management. So you're able to edit configurations offline, email them around, and apply them to system. So lots of automated tools.
Tremendous. I see several of you are asking for a copy of the recorded presentation. We do appreciate that. As a reminder, the webinar will be available on our website. I can send a link to any of you who requested, or simply go to usdatamanagement.com and click on the webinars page. You can see upcoming sessions, as well as click on a link to this recording. It looks like that's a wrap as far as the incoming questions. So Ken, I want to thank you again for joining us and sharing wonderful information there. We do appreciate everyone's time in joining us today, and certainly appreciate the opportunity to team with you all towards excellence in compliance. Have a wonderful day.